Welcome back to my channel, everyone, and welcome to my channel to everyone who's new here. Today I'll be making a quick video talking about household spirits in German folk magic and folk belief. To be quite honest with you, when I first thought about making this video, I was kind of, unsure about where to start and how I could even fit everything I wanted to in a video, and it turns out I can't because this topic is so huge, and every time I try to adequately cover a specific part of this topic, there is even more underneath. And part of the reason for why that is that in German folk magic, household spirits are kind of so ambiguous that almost any spirit at any given point could be considered a household spirit depending on circumstance. And I don't think that I'll be able to cover the entirety of the German spirit world in a video. So again, this is just going to be an overview. But I once already did a video about spirits in German folk magic in general, and I recommend you also go give that a watch. But today we are trying to take this huge topic of spirits and just shrink it down a bit, focus a bit more in on the spirits that could be considered household spirits, and then we'll kind of branch out from there again, and I explain to you how every spirit in German folk belief is kind of connected to the household and the homestead in one way or another, some more, some less. When you look up German household spirits online, probably one of the first things that you might find is the word 𝔖𝔨𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔨. And this specific term and the story containing the 𝔖𝔨𝔨𝔨𝔨 originates somewhere in the Cologne Valley area. However, there are certain thematic story beats in their folklore that come up in other stories about German household spirits from other regions. So I really recommend looking into the story of the 𝔖𝔨𝔨𝔨𝔨 if you're interested in this topic, because even though this is very Cologne-centric, this story, it will still give you a rough idea of how household spirits generally function in German folk magic. But just for the purposes of this video, I will give you a quick rundown of these themes. So, generally, household spirits in the story of the 𝔖𝔨𝔨𝔨𝔨 and in many other stories throughout Germany are described as generally smaller. Sometimes they have a funny pointed head on, like you would typically see dwarves wearing in folkloric depictions, and there's actually a connection between them and dwarves. Also, they were generally very hard to detect. They wanted to keep their privacy, so to say, and they really hate being discovered. Generally, they only come out at night, but if they're out and about during the day, they're said to have an invisibility spell put on them. So you can't detect them, but they can detect you, and they will judge you for the things you do. Often these types of household spirits are described as usually male and sometimes, like dwarfs, have beards. And depending on the reciprocity that you have with them, they can either aid your household or destroy a bunch of stuff. And this can go into very diametrically opposed extremes. So, for one example, if you have really good reciprocity with them, they can make you rich and famous and grant many of your wishes. But if you have really bad reciprocity with them, they can go so far as to even kill you, your pets, or burn your house completely to the ground. So it's in your best interest to always be nice to them. But there are certain things that you should keep in mind when establishing a relationship with household spirits. For example, is that they don't necessarily act or think in the way that humans would. They really detest being observed or being noticed in any substantial way. Generally speaking, they know that you know that they're there, but they don't like to be reminded of it, which complicates the situation with giving them offerings a whole bunch. You really have to walk a fine line between showing acknowledgement and then also not overdoing it. There are folkloric stories of people giving presents such as clothes to these house spirits, and then they would just take the clothes and run for the hills. Similarly to Dobby from Harry Potter, which is probably also where the inspiration came from initially. The reason for why they leave when they are being big gifts such as clothing, especially in stories where they are naked most of the time, is either that they get offended by the gift itself, or that they get so happy that they now have clothes for themselves that they then kind of release themselves out of this servitude and just go on with their lives. There is a story from my region which mentions these household spirits, and it basically goes like there was a lot of good reciprocity between the spirits and the farmers, which made the farmers very rich. But then over time a certain farmer takes the help that these spirits give him for granted, and he grows resentful of them because reasons. And so he acts ungrateful towards them and even tries to chase them away with his dog. And so the household spirits run away back into the hill where they came from. And so the household spirits run to the hill from which they came from and go back into their domain underground, very dwarf-like again. And all of the farmers in the surrounding area lose their luck. And the specific farmer that chose to hunt them away has now such bad luck that he dies shortly thereafter. And this is of course a very extreme example of humans going against spirits, but you find these themes popping up in folklore time and time again. This pattern of once humans worked good with spirits, then the humans got somehow resentful or took them for granted or got arrogant, and then the spirits turn against the humans. And this is basically a sort of warning story. What I personally also find interesting is that the home of these spirits, where they initially come from, is explicitly stated to be in hills, in mountains, somewhere underground. And this in combination with their description also matching up with dwarfs, generally speaking, leads me to believe that there is a distinct connection between the two. In my personal UPG, which stands for Unverified Personal Gnosis, these household spirits are just land spirits, dwarf-like land spirits, which chose to reside with humans for a time, for exchange and reciprocity. And this is also where we can kind of see the connection between household spirits initially and, more generally speaking, land spirits. And to make things even a bit more complicated, dwarves are basically just elves. And an elf can just be any form of land spirit. There's evidence in the Eddas that suggests that dwarves are called dark elves, probably because they work underground in the dark. And the topic of elves themselves is just another big, huge iceberg of topics to explore. Because if you go through the sources, you might not find a lot about house spirits, but you could find a lot about elves, for example, or dwarves. And then you can kind of start connecting the dots, but don't expect them to match up perfectly always. They are sometimes contradictory, as it is common with oral storytelling. Now on our imaginary dartboard, where we've pinned house spirits to dwarves to elves, we can make another connection to ancestral spirits. Because again, in a lot of folklore, and I think especially folklore from southern Scandinavia and maybe also northern Germany, there are themes and patterns of ancestors becoming house spirits, especially the ancestor that would build a house would then also become the spirit that resides within it and takes care of it. And these ancestors would show up again as dwarf-like beings. So again, a lot of connections. This is also where the cult of the ancestors plays into house spirits. Because similarly to house spirits, we also make offerings for the ancestors. There are stories from the conversion period of the pagan tribe of the Saxons that lived in northwestern Germany that they held feasts on the graves of their ancestors and gave them offerings such as meat. We have accounts of people leaving small offerings on the graves of their ancestors, usually to restore the health of someone. And you can see again, reciprocity also plays a very big part here. Not to pivot to Scandinavia so much, but there is a holiday recorded called Alfaplot, which was the feast or the celebration of the Alpha, of the elves, which took place somewhere around October, November, that period. People think that the god Freyr probably had some connections to that, but it has also been postulated that this might have been a celebration for the deceased ancestors. And now with this household spirit connection, this adds yet another layer on top of this supposed celebration. But to quickly pivot back to Germany, we don't just have accounts of household spirits being in this dwarf-like form. We also have accounts of them being in the shape of beautiful women that would visit the homestead at night. They were called things like Nachtfrauen, night women, or gute Holden. And some of you might already raise an eyebrow at that. And yes, indeed, it could be that there's also a connection to Frau Holle, yet another red string from our imaginary dartboard to connect household spirits to. We have a church decree from 1484 that specifically forbids making offerings to these spirits. An account from the mid-14th century in a book called Mirror of Souls states another church decree from southern Germany, which says that they sin also who on the night of the Epiphany leave food and drink on their table, so that all shall go well with them in the coming year. Therefore sinners also are they who offer food to Percht. And there it should ding again, because Percht and Holder are also connected. Likely these are just two names for the same being. And we can also see the reciprocity in exchange for luck and good fortune. Exactly like so many stories about household spirits. But Percht or the Holden aren't necessarily household spirits, they're more like deities. Or are they? This is just to show that the difference between what is considered a household spirit, a land spirit, an ancestral spirit, or even a deity in German folk belief is not so boxed in. What I personally also find interesting about this account, that it specifically states the night of the Epiphany where these offerings would be given. And if you don't know, the Epiphany on the 6th of January is in the same celebratory complex as many other dates that are important to folk magic, such as the winter solstice, Christmas, or generally the Rauhnächte, which is the period between Christmas and Epiphany, where evil spirits are said to come out of the underworld and haunt the living. Generally, these more malevolent spirits are classified as Unholden, where the good spirits that also come around this time are classified as Gute Holden. In more southern German-speaking territories, there are accounts of the Schiachperchten as the evil spirits and the Schönperchten, the pretty Perchten, as the good spirits. And often they also get personified by people wearing elaborate costumes. Also, making big offerings to female spirits around this time kind of invokes in me the feeling that this might be connected to the Modernied, which is a celebration that was observed among the pagan Anglo-Saxons of England. Translated, this would mean Mother's Night. And today we aren't exactly sure what this was for, who was the celebration held because of, but it is likely some form of very powerful female spirit. Now, some say that it was female ancestral spirit, kind of a mirroring of the alpha plot, which could have been for more male ancestral spirits. Some say that it was held in honor of great female deities, but again, as we just talked about, the difference between those two is not really set in stone, and this could also be connected to the cult of the matrons. They are basically a set of 3 female deities, which was honored by the Germanic tribes. However, we only have records for them on the border with the Roman Empire, because the Romans planned a lot of sacred sites dedicated to the matrons and then rebuilt them in a Roman style, with Roman-style stone statues with inscriptions on them. So this is the only way that we have their worship and names recorded. And these sets of matrons all have names which connect them to the region around them. They have names that relate to the tribe that lived in the region. They have names that connects them to the mountains and rivers of the region. So they might have been more land spirits, or could have also been considered ancestral spirits, but they were worshipped like deities, and perhaps their big celebrations is then also connected to the Mother's Night that I've talked about, and that would also connect them to the later folkloric belief of great female spirits coming in around this time and blessing the home if you would give them offerings. And this is similar to the more dwarf-like spirits that I described, that generally also give you good fortune if you give them offerings. And just to make everything even more complicated, another word for household spirits in German is kobold. And today kobold is more considered our word for an Irish leprechaun, but it used to refer exclusively to more household-like spirits. And the last part of this kobold name, the old, could be connected to hold, like Holle. So we have these dwarf-like beings connected potentially to these great female spirits. I get that a lot of you might be pretty frustrated right now if you came here for like very straightforward answers and for someone to tell you exactly what to do and what to categorize everything as. But the truth is, the spirit world generally doesn't function like that, and neither do we. We have many different complexes of meaning which are all interconnected, but on face value don't really give any coherent message. Themes that repeat again and again, no matter if it's for household spirit, ancestral spirit, great female deities, is that reciprocity is key, that you should give offerings, often at specific times throughout the year. You should be grateful for the help that they give you, and you should act accordingly. And again, these are just the bare bones of this topic. You can go so much deeper, but this, generally speaking, is more of an introduction to this huge topic. And no matter what, the most impactful things you won't find in books somewhere. You will find them by making these connections yourself, by trying to connect to these spirits yourself. And then for you, some of these things might become a lot more clear. Historically, offerings for these spirits consisted of bread, cheese, wine, eggs, water, meat. But today you can offer them basically whatever you like, as long as you do it in a respectful way. For example, you can dedicate your time to them, you can dedicate music to them, etc. But before you do that, I would really suggest you research folklore from around your region and see if there's any mention of the spirits that are local to you, because sometimes they have their unique regional quirks. I think there was one region in southeastern Germany, I believe, where it was forbidden to give these spirits caraway bread because it was somehow poisonous to them, and you wouldn't want to do like such a big faux pas with the spirit world. So you have the general idea that offerings are important, but for more specific things, I really recommend you look into like local stuff. Also, if you make your offerings out in nature, make sure that they are safe to put out in nature, and everything that isn't safe you should take back with you. Keep that in mind. You don't want to offend these spirits by making glitter water and pouring that into the forest. That would not be good for anyone involved. And with that in mind, the biggest thing to remember is to just be respectful. So this is everything that I generally wanted to talk to you about when it comes to the introduction into working with household spirits in a German folk magic framework. If you want more content, you can find all of my social media down below. I have a lot of stuff over there. Also, you can find me on Patreon, where you can pay me to put out content on time, and also you can find in-depth, fully sourced blog posts on there that delve into one specific topic at a time. You can also find early access to my videos there and exclusive videos, etc, etc. It's all there if you click the link. And speaking of Patreon, now we also come to the Patreon shoutouts. If you don't know, anyone that subscribes to the 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔨 tier on my Patreon or higher gets a shoutout at the end of my videos. And today that would be 𝔨𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶�𝔢𝔫, Rini, Kelsey Kramer, Caitlin Renegar, Pexenheim, Willow Rose Witch, and Megan. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔀𝔬𝔢𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬𝔬